Thank you. All right, so here goes. So everybody, welcome to the book club today. We meet on Sundays, and I just want to tell Jerry that during the lockdown, we were meeting every Sunday. And initially, I thought, my goodness, how is this going to sustain itself? Because how are we going to find so many books and so many speakers to sustain this? But right until April last year, we did it. And not only did we do it, but we were booked like 6 months in advance. So there were that many people willing and eager to present. And I think it was absolutely fabulous having that little sort of oasis of experience when the world was going crazy and nothing much else was happening. Now that things are open and people are busier, we have decided to meet twice a month, but we are continuing on Zoom because it just is so convenient, you know. I mean, the traffic doesn't bother you, the weather doesn't bother you, you're at home peacefully, and everything works so well. So, so here we are, and today's session, we are fortunate enough to have the author himself with us, and there's nothing like that. Now, I keep saying this, that having the author present is so special. So Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today. We feel that it is especially special having you here. Okay, so now, Jerry, you've been in the writing field for quite a while now, and you've made your name. Everybody knows Jerry Pinto's name, that there's not a soul around who would say, who's that? I would like you to tell us a little about how you got into writing, which areas you have written about, because I know that you don't only do fiction in English. You've written about cinema, you have translated from Marathi and Hindi. I personally am not familiar with the translations, but I was wondering, are they Dalit writers? I mean, are those the ones that you chose? Would you tell us a little bit first about that journey into writing and your choices, the choices that you made before we go into this book particularly? Over to you, Jerry.
I started my profession age of 14 when I was a mathematics. Am I audible?
We can't hear you clearly.
Can you come closer to the mic?
There's an issue with his internet, as it shows here. Is it possible for you to change your internet connection, sir?
I don't have another internet.
Okay, come closer and speak. Let's see. Go ahead.
I'll just put off my video. I'm going to turn off my
Camera.
Turning off my camera and seeing if that works. Yeah.
That would be a pity, but okay.
Yeah. I just have to. Oh, here we go. Okay. Does this work better now?
It does. It does. Yes.
Okay. So I started my professional career at the age of 14 when I was teaching mathematics to young students who could not understand mathematics well. And this I continued to do until the age of 21. And I would probably have teaching mathematics day. Mohini, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's kind of breaking up and stretching.
But good enough now.
But well, yes, we will struggle with it. Yes, go on. Go on.
So I would probably have been teaching mathematics even today. Is this better? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
I would have probably mathematics even today if it had not been for the intervention of a friend of mine. Her name was Rashmi Palkhiwala, and she insisted that I could be a writer, and she persuaded me to write, and she actually forced me to write, and even went to the extent of typing my material for me and taking it to the publishers which were the newspapers, of course. And she started me on this journey of being a writer. I did not have the self-confidence to be a writer. I did not think that I thought it was something that people who went to Oxford and Cambridge, or had an education at Harvard and knew the right people were going to be doing. And I had none of those connections. So I was a little lost. But Rashmi Palkhiwala was very determined that I should be a writer. And she took my stuff around. At that time, I was writing funny pieces, 500 to 600 word pieces for the newspapers. They were called middles in those times.
Yes, delightful. I
Yeah.
miss those middles.
Yeah. And I started working in that way. Then an editor called Hotokshi Doctor, who now I believe lives in Pune, wrote to Rashmi and asked whether this Jerry Pinto would like to do any other writing. So the next day I turned up at her office and met her, and I began to review books, and I began to review cinema and write about food. Basically, I wrote about anything that anyone would allow me to write about. And I discovered that I was really mad about writing, but it took me another 10 years to move from the world of teaching to the world of writing. So at the age of 30, I became a full-time writer. I joined the Times of India, where I worked for a couple of years before quitting and doing a variety of other things. But through it all, I was writing all the time. Does that answer your question, Mohini?
It does indeed. It does. Okay, so my next question is going to be about your choices regarding the translated stuff that you brought out. How did that happen? So clearly your Marathi and Hindi is very good, which is why you were able to translate. And how did those choices come around, the authors that you chose to translate?
It's a long and complicated answer, but I'll try and cut it short. To begin with, I think I started translating because I felt that it might be something that would enrich my experience of language in general. That my association with English in which I write would become deeper if I were to experiment with other languages as well. But here I want to say something about the role of Shana Bokle, my friend, in mentoring me as a translator. I remember ringing her up and asking her, do you think I could translate Cobalt Blue by Sachin Kundalkar?
He's been disconnected. He's been disconnected by Moini. We don't know exactly what happened.
I'm
No,
sorry.
he's back. He's
He's
back.
So, am I audible again, Mohini?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so she said, I asked her whether she thought I could translate Sachin Kundalkar's Cobalt Blue. And she said, you, with an exclamation mark at the end. Had she said you with a question mark at the end, I would not have had the courage to translate. And this act of faith, I think, made me a translator. It also had an impact on my teaching. I teach at the Sophia Polytechnic Social Communications Media, and I realized that it is very important for us to be an exclamation mark in the life of our students rather than a. As to your question about the choices, I believe that if one is a writer of one's own fiction, then one translates because one feels as if one is
Okay, it's becoming rather indistinct.
Is this better now?
Slightly, yes. Can you just do your best? I mean, just stay close to the mic and let's hope for the best.
I'm trying to get close better.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm practically kissing my phone now.
Well, you can almost swallow it. But
Okay,
we need to hear you.
all right. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I think in my translation practice, I have to fall in love with a book in order to give away uh, the better part of a year to the book, which is what it takes me to translate, the time it takes me to translate a book. So that year, that time is also time I could be doing my own writing or my own poetry or my children's fiction, and I spend it with a writer, sometimes a dead writer, as in the case of Daya Pawar and his Baluta, um, or Babu Rao Bagul, जेव्हा मी जात चोरली होती, or स्वदेश दीपक, मैंने मांडू नहीं देखा. So the you did ask something about them being Dalit writers. I have done a fair amount of Dalit writing, but it is not about the Dalit identity. It is really about the book itself.
Hmm.
If the book speaks to me, and if the book demands my attention, and I want my friends to be able to read it, my friends who do not read Marathi or Hindi to be able to read it, then I want to do this book, and it becomes an urgency. That's when I translate.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And what about your interest in cinema?
I think I think we all probably are interested in cinema at some level. I think it's kind of cinema music, for instance, is the
Oh,
white
yes.
noise of our society. We all can hum a few tunes from Bollywood or from Tollywood or Mollywood or whatever language we come from. It is inescapable. And I think when I watched a lot of cinema growing up, but specifically, I have to say, I watched Bollywood in the 70s and 80s. Latika is here, and I know that um, she's a well-known film buff. But I wasn't the kind of, I was only in college when I saw my first quote unquote art movie, which was Man of Marble by Vaida. And then began, because I suddenly realized there in that theater that cinema could tell other kinds of stories. I began to see Sham Benegal's films and Manikol's films, and began then to move on to the French Nouvelle Vague. But I was a very, very much a latecomer to that sort of cinema. I still do not pretend to be able to talk about it with any authority, so I don't. But I know that my early experiences of Bollywood were formative for me, and not only were they formative, they were also in a way they helped me. I could tell, even as a young person, that some scenes were just repellent. And I didn't know why they were repellent, but I knew that there was something really fundamentally wrong with them. For instance, there would be something said about women, which was really nasty, or there would be something said about Christians, say. And I think it was those that before I had heard of feminism or before I had understood what communalism was, I understood that these were things that were infecting the that gynophobia and a communalism were infecting my favorite uh, form of cinema. So when I came to write about Helen, I think I drew on that archive of memory, not just of cinema, but of my responses to cinema, and worked from that. I have to say that though that the two film books or three film books that I have done, I would not say qualify me to be an expert in cinema. When I'm asked to be on juries and stuff, I try to explain to people that writing a book on cinema doesn't actually make you an expert on cinema. You need to. I mean, it is such a huge and vast field of study that you need to know much more than I do. Like, I mean, you need to know a fair bit of music, you have to have fairly sound aesthetic theory, you have to have an understanding of things like reflectances, you have to know what editing is and what editing choices mean. It's a very complicated field. And I think I I did get an award for Helen, The Life and Times of an Age Bomb,
Yes, yes,
writing on cinema, but I would still not say that I'm an expert in the way, say, Latika is. So there are many things that I think one, see, I think in some senses, all writing comes from the unexpressed, right? So there's something inside you that is seeking to speak. So I remember, I suppose it was sitting in those dark cinema halls in Mahim, and wanting to talk back to the screen to say, hey, what do you mean by calling all Catholic women floozies? Or why is it that you are so terrified of educated women in cinema? Uh, you want to say those things to the screen, and of course, cinema being a one-way, in those days a one-way communication, you couldn't say them. So I think the unexpressed is generally what writers are lucky is that they get a chance to express the unexpressed. Yeah.
that's very beautifully put. Uh, that your responses to that need to find expression, and as a writer, you are able to do that, and that's how the book happens.
Yes.
Wonderful. So, Jerry, you are a Sahitya Academy Award winner, and would that be in connection with your translations?
No, actually, it's in connection with M and the Big Boom, the first novel that I wrote.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
at one point, Geeta Hariharan did tell me that in the same year as M and the Big Boom, my translation of Baluta came out, and that they were strongly considering me for the translation prize. And then she said, in a nation of 1 billion people, we didn't think we should give this two prizes from the Sahitya Academy to the same writer. And I thought, why not? But of course, uh, you know, uh, I
That
suppose
would
that
be a
was just a
first.
case that would no, it isn't actually. I later did some research and found that Dilip Chitre won for translation and poetry in the same year. So they had a precedent, but never mind. They probably I'm not Dilip Chitre. So I think I got my Sahitya Academy for M and the Big Boom in English.
I see. Okay. Marvelous. Well, I loved that book. I really loved it.
Thank you.
It was so from the heart, and that combination of the sadness of the situation and the humor that you were still able to bring into it, that was a very winning combination. It felt so real. It really did. Okay, so shall we talk about today's book now? Would you like to tell us about it? How did the education of Yuri happen? Where did that come from?
I think it began. Okay, I think for most people, the memory of friendship, the first friendship that one has had, is so far away that it is forgotten. It's not, and probably looking at all of you, you probably made your first friends when you were 3 years old and you went to nursery school or you went downstairs to play and you met somebody there who could be your friend, right? That didn't happen with me. I didn't have friends at school. And so I remember going to college and praying for a friend, actually saying a prayer and saying, please send me a friend, somebody. I want a friend here. This is a new start for me. Elphinston was very far from my home. So I hope that I could be anonymous again and start out with a fresh slate. And I did make that friend in college. And it was
So,
a
so are you
wonderful.
saying that there's quite a bit of autobiographical element in this book?
I have to say this,
Exactly.
Mohini.
My question.
Yeah, I have to say, Mohini, to answer that question, let me just step for a moment into the time that I was writing Leela Naidu's autobiography for her. It took me
Mhm.
about 3 years of toil uh, to keep going to her house and getting her to talk. And the reason why I did that because there was hello, can you hear me?
Ramesh, please shut your mic.
Someone's mic is on.
Go ahead. Go on, Jerry.
Yeah. Okay. So Leela Naidu called me up and said, would you help write my autobiography? And I said yes, almost immediately. And later when I thought, why am I doing this? I realized that there was some part of me that wanted to be physically very beautiful, stunningly beautiful. Okay. The way I am right now is perfectly acceptable. I know it's not, but I'm not stunningly gorgeous. I don't walk into a room and stop conversations. And that's what Leela Naidu had. This transcendent beauty. So I wanted to know what it would be like to be a 65-year-old woman talking about her life and a life lived with the knowledge of beauty as a given. So you see, everything that we do is personal. Everything that we do has some root in the autobiography. It's there. It's just that some roots are more obvious and some roots are hidden. But to answer your question, Mohini and Satish, yes, there is a very strong autobiographical element uh, in the Education of Yuri, but it is, I would say, about 90% of it is true and 90% of it is fiction. Now, if you know your Venn diagrams,
Yes,
you will
yes.
know that this gives you a large space that is about nearly 80% of the space for you to stand as the writer and as the reader and make the decision about what is fiction and what is not. That's your call. If you say to me, if someone comes up to me and says, you wrote your life, I can point out 20 different places where the narrative in Yuri does not equate with the narrative in life, in my life. But the emotional tonalities, the the feeling of sadness, the feeling of betrayal, the clumsiness at love, the clumsiness in friendship, all those are very real. All those are very me. So events are what seem to obsess people. Did you really do this? Did you really go there? That's not the point. The point is what we draw from is the wellspring of our emotional worlds. The factual world is very unimportant. And the factual world in Yuri, therefore, is not my world, but the emotional world is my world. That self-pitying, sort of teenager who wants to write poetry but doesn't have anything to write about, that's Jerry Pinto. But Yuri Fonseca does many things and has many experiences that were not mine.
Um,
I hope that
You
answers
come
the
out, no,
question.
you come out very well. When I was reading your book, I could feel the inner sense that was there. And I think it was what you said is exactly what a writer feels like. Take something from one's life, looks around it, and see how it can be put down in a different way.
True.
Go ahead, go ahead. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt it.
Not at all, not at all. I'd finished with my answer. So if there's something anyone wants to, you want to ask the next question, Mohini?
Yeah, folks, everyone is welcome to ask questions.
Raise
Okay,
your hand. Just
so
raise your
just
hand.
raise your hand and we will come to you. Now, when I read this book, I there was one aspect that I couldn't connect with, and that was Bombay, because I don't know Bombay.
Okay.
So, I grew up in Delhi, then I've lived in Pune, and I know that a lot of Pune people are, half the time in Bombay, but that hasn't been me. And I feel that there's such a strong image of Bombay as you knew it.
Mhm.
And I'm sure Satish is able to connect with that because he's a Bombay boy. But I felt sad that I was missing one little bit of identification. I could not identify with Bombay because I don't know it. But the city comes across. You have brought the city alive. Those certain pockets. That whole thing about being a Mahim boy. You know,
Mm.
and yeah, what Yuri feels that he's not cool. You know,
Mm.
he's like he tries to tell Muzammil that Mahim is near Bandra, then he realizes this guy probably has never heard of Bandra either. They're
Mm.
so sort of South Bombay, these kids,
Sobo.
and that aura of the privilege of being a South Bombay brat, as it were. and the very different world that Yuri inhabits. But I was very interested in that the fact that he wears khadi and even his socks have to be khadi. I mean, this is not an association I had made with the church.
No,
I had not.
No.
I know. Yeah, because there's, like if you think about it, there were many Christians in the freedom struggle, including Joseph Baptista, who was a lawyer and a union worker. And there were many elements in my family that were deeply nationalist in that sense, marched with Lohia on Goa. And I drew from them in those sense. Like for instance, in my family, my father would not allow us to use sugar at home because he felt that the sugar lobby had ruined Maharashtra's hinterland by dragging water from it. And so we
Yes.
use honey or jaggery. And
Mhm.
that he felt that having servants was a part of a feudal mindset because one couldn't pay them enough for them to live in good homes, and therefore, if one couldn't pay them, one shouldn't have servants. So many of these things were drawn from my life, and the risk there is that you're taking. Okay, so just to go back to what you said, Mohini, about the city, right? You said that the city, because you did not live in Bombay, you felt you missed something. Now,
Yes.
maybe 9/10 of your readers will not have lived in Bombay, right?
Mm.
But still, you're, this is the city that you know, and this is the city that you must present. So I would say like Georges Simenon for me is the quintessential Parisian writer. He presents you with a certain Paris. And whether you have lived in it or not, you know that Paris now. You know the
Yes.
small
Yes.
bistros, you know uh, the the Lock 19, you know the ins and outs of the city sometimes in a very real way, perhaps even better than if you have been to Paris. So I think I'm not saying I'm George Simenon. What I'm saying is that each writer takes that risk that you
Of
say
course.
these are the characters that I'm presenting to you, and they are not the standard character. They are slightly different. Theo Julio, for instance, has no sexuality that we can tell of because
Yes.
he
Yes.
decided to devote his life to the church. But he's not going to join the church. What is this inside and outside position? I don't know, but that's how he presented himself to me. And this is the kind of life that he inflicted on Yuri in a way, because we inflict life on our children, right? I mean, whether we choose to give them khadi socks or we choose to buy them Adidas shoes, those are the choices that we make for our children willy-nilly if we have children. It's inevitable.
Yes.
So, yeah. So then the question is, does Theo Julio come across as a lie, as a as a potential character? Does he seem real to you? Does he seem like someone who could possibly have lived? And that's not always the only definitive this thing, because trope of characterization, as we know, sometimes the larger than life character is even more important to fiction than just the ordinary everyday character. So when you're working with character, you're treading that fine line between trying to invent something new and relying on what I think young people now call relatability. That, oh, you know this kind of person. So there are some characters whom I hope are relatable, and some characters who are introduced as new ideas. Yeah.
More. Can I interrupt? Jerry, I think uh, Theo Julio needs a book on his own. His life seems very, very interesting, and what he's doing.
Yes.
I tried to
Thank
figure
you.
out what does he do now. He's not a priest. He's not he's church. What does he do? The question does it
There is
because
a whole
he's got a
community.
very nice heart. I would. That's how
Yeah,
I look
there
at
is
it.
a community of people who have who have contented themselves with very little. I think it was part of probably that. I think their number is dwindling in the Christian community. They would involve themselves largely in what they would call good works, They would have a certain fixed income on which they would work, and they would not seek anymore because they would be kind of, Franciscan in that devotion to poverty. Now I think we don't have them anymore, but the Theojulios were very frequent in my youth. There were many men who and women who had devoted themselves to just the uplift of their brothers and sisters, and and worked outside the church, but with the church, in alignment with the church's objectives. And they were not missionaries. They had no desire to convert you. They just had a desire to help. And so they did that. That's what Theo Julio just basically did. But he had some money from the sale of his Goa house. And so, he's got this flat, he's put some money in the bank, and he's living that way. And that's why that sense of uh, Yuri's sense of being constrained by that 10 rupee note. That 10 rupee note is really exciting for him because it's the first time he's probably had that much money. So he wants to know where he should put it. Should he put it in his chore pocket? I don't know if anyone has chore pockets anymore.
Yes, we used to have it in school days, college days.
Pockets, yeah. So it's, I think sometimes in Indian fiction, the whole subject of money is driven underground. Either there is poverty, which is generally, completely undeniable, or there is middle class affluence that never talks about money. And yet, in ordinary conversation, in ordinary interaction, how much time we spend thinking about money, thinking about salaries, thinking about these things. And I think Yuri's concern with, who pays bills in the restaurant, how much a book can cost, whether, a date will cost him, what a book will cost him. All these things are like what we grew up with. My mind in college was very focused on the future because it was the 1980s, right? When the subjects of newspaper reports were the brain drain, unemployment. And so we were really terrified about the possibility of not getting a job in the way that young people today would never be, because there's always the call center that they feel that, you can go and get a job there. We just were terrified that we might not get a job. So those things that were obsessing us, and we talked about them relentlessly, and we discussed money relentlessly and ruthlessly. Unfortunately, if I were to put all those conversations in, it would have bored everybody. So I had to just hint at them. But I do think it is important to understand how much money matters in the middle class. You shouldn't be able to write a middle class novel without confronting money.
I mean, I remembered my college days when I didn't get any pocket money, but my parents gave me sort of enough money to get to college and come back and maybe have a wee bit more. And then I came across friends who got pocket money, a certain amount a month. And I thought, oh, that is so marvelous. And I asked my parents, can I have pocket money? And they said, okay, how much? So my friends got 50 rupees a month in those days. And I asked for 50. And then I realized that 50 it was not sufficient. I mean, it didn't get me to college and back and have a bite at the canteen every now and then. And the things those kids did, to save money is that they did not go by bus and buy a ticket the way I did. They hitchhiked and got to college for free. And then there were the dangers involved in that. And well, I absolutely, that spoke to me, this thing about money and who pays and calculating. But also I thought it was very marvelous that this young man prefers to buy a book to maybe eating well. That was lovely to behold.
That is why I think something that all book readers of my generation went through. No, we all our entire libraries were secondhand, and so there was a thrill about buying a book that was new. That was so wonderful. That I mean, like the new books almost were like the rajas of the library. Like those were things that you really invested in. So I remember a friend once telling me about Edward Said's Orientalism. He said, that's a book you have to buy new. You shouldn't buy it secondhand. Because that's how we had a kind of hierarchy inside our heads.
Yes.
These books are that.
It's like now, like there are some books I'd rather borrow from the library, so that I can just return them. And there are
Yeah.
some that I want to own forever and ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that difference. Okay, now Shraddha has her hand up. So Shraddha, would you like to pipe in?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I was intrigued by your question to Pinto sir about Bombay as a almost like a visceral character in itself in his fiction. And am studying the representation of urban spaces in literature. And of course, I come at it from from a student, maybe I'll be reaching here, but saying from an academic point of view. But I'm curious, as an author who has lived in a city all their lives, such that it's become almost idiomatic. When you're creating or building this world, this city in your fiction, how much of it is a personal process and how much of it comes from an awareness of a reader who, like ma'am, probably doesn't know Bombay or Mumbai as it is now. So I just wanted to know that, is there an awareness that it's going to be read by someone who probably doesn't have that sort of real intimate sort of knowledge of the city, or is it more of a personal outflow then is so rich that probably an outsider is automatically able to relate?
One of the things of today about the world of writing is that we cannot imagine, or we should not imagine, the world of writing as being completely innocent and the same as, say, Charles Dickens' time, when Charles Dickens was inventing London for all of us. So today, if I say Elphinstone College, you can simply Google Elphinstone College and you can get an image, and you can get a history, you can get a geography, you can get whatever you need about it. So that's at one level. It's an easier thing for, if there is an interested writer or reader who would like to go beyond, they can always use the the internet as a way of supplementing information or even checking information. Right? That's one level. The second level of it is, I think, there is an imaginative geography in everybody's head, right? It is not the city as it is, but it is the city as it is painted or stained by your encounter with it. So the British Council Library in Bombay on the I think it was the second floor of Mittal Towers, was always a space of exclusion. It was a place where I did not feel that I was welcome or wanted, because there were many barriers to it. You had to wait for 6 months. You had to explain why you wanted your cards, and then you got your cards eventually. And there was a very clear feeling that it was meant for English literature students of South Bombay. The British Council had to be in there because it was very, very important in my formative years. But Samovar had also had to be there because it was where you went when you had money, and that little money suddenly evaporated under your eyes. And I remember that woman in the white coat. So there are many things inside that are there inside your head, which demand recording, and you then put in. Now, say for instance, I have Kemold Gallery inside the book, right? Which was an iconic art gallery in Bombay, guarded by a ferocious woman. And later I wrote Citizen Gallery, which is about the Kemold Art Gallery. So I think in some ways, all my books talk to each other and they complete each other's trajectories. But as I said, I think there's a risk in locating your space clearly. And then if you describe it too much, you probably lose the interest of those who know what you're describing, and the people who and in general, I have found, Shraddha, that description bores me. I want things to be minimally suggested. And the best way I have found in writing to suggest a character is by giving them the dialogue that is credible to that character. Once you have done that, the reader does the rest of the work by building the character inside their heads. So you'll find that most of my characters are never described. Like, I don't tell you what color their eyes are, or what. You're just allowed.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think Latika wants to say something.
Yeah,
Vispi has her hand up also since quite a while. So,
Okay.
Latika, if you would forbear, we'll just let Vispi go first. Yes, Vispi.
I think you're on mute, Visti.
Mute. Yeah.
That's better.
No, yeah. No, because we'd all got been muted by the host. That's okay. So Jerry, I just took to Yuri from, I think, page 1.
Thank you.
And I love.
Vispi, can you talk a little louder?
Sure. Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I love the conversations that he has in his head, with himself. And one that really spoke to me, that's very much in the beginning, where I think Tio Julio says something about like to be me. And he said, I would like to be me too, only I don't know who that is. And I don't know what my world is. And I think we've all felt that, haven't we? That
Yes.
question of who am I?
Yeah.
And to find answers to that. So that, as I said, really spoke to me. And the other, when he discovers poetry and he's decided he has to write, and then that feeling, and I wondered if you've had that too, Jerry. With that came the horrible emptiness of wanting to write and having nothing to say.
This
Yes.
really, truly, yeah. Those are the
Did you go
central
through-
moments, I think. Yeah. Those are very big inflection points because he's not at that point. See, if you don't know who you are, then where can you, what is the little ground on which you can stand in order to claim a space in the world of literature and write poetry? Where can, if you haven't got, see, I think, eventually we all discover that you don't have to go to war, right? You don't have to have fallen in love and had your heart broken. You just have to find some place from the self, and from that self you speak. But if that self is nebulous, if that self is kind of like slightly is slipping out of your grasp each time you try to establish it, because when you're young, you want to define self. You want to be able to say, yes, this is me. Later, you grow up to realize that this is a moving target. It's always going to be changing.
Yeah.
You're not going to ever define its sides, and sometimes you will surprise yourself with your magnanimity, and sometimes you will surprise yourself with your petty-mindedness. Both will happen simultaneously, I think. But it is important to remember that I think when you're 14, there is very strong feeling that the self needs to be defined, and you need to understand who you are. And then from that space, perhaps it would be possible to write. But he doesn't have that self. He has no notion of that self. And therefore, there is that terror of wanting to write, but not knowing what to say. Well recognized, Crispy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And just if I may add just one more thing, unlike Mohini, who felt that she was getting to know Bombay maybe through the way you were presenting it, those little bits about introducing someone we've all known and maybe been in awe of, Homai Shroff, and you actually mention her by name as the principal. Those were little touches that perhaps only those who are more familiar would relate to. But I just thought I'd bring in Homai Shroff. You all loved her also.
And you guessed who Goradia was?
No, because I'm not an Elphinstonian.
Okay, Kapadia, Miss Sunu Kapadia.
Oh, really? That's my very good friend. Really? Okay, I'll look at it again now. Okay, Jerry, thanks for revealing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Latika, would you like to say your bit?
Yeah. Hello, Jerry. This is Latika Patgaonkar. I have one little comment and one question. And the comment is that you said a little while ago, and I go along with you, about you're not necessarily describing characters, but you allow them to suggest. I mean, you do it in a way that they suggest things to you instead of actually describing and telling the reader directly what a person is or how he looks. And recently I'd written an article on a film where I also ended by saying that the film actually gives leaves creative spaces for the viewer to fill. So it's a bit like that. But my question actually is that you have translated from Hindi and Marathi, both.
Yeah.
Now, I have also translated, but I have not translated fiction. You have translated fiction. How have you got into the two worlds, the world of Hindi and the world of Marathi? Because these are cultural, things that you're entering, cultural, emotional, and then familial. It could be different slightly, worlds themselves, intellectual and so on. So did you have to, these two worlds both intimately enough to be able to translate from two languages?
I have the feeling, Latika, that, I always see myself as a pilgrim to Marathi and to Hindi.
As a what?
A pilgrim.
Oh.
So I'm a pilgrim, and I am in that spirit. I am a respectful pilgrim who does not know his way around, but will try his very best to establish some kind of map of the terrain, a linguistic map at some level, an emotional map, as you said, a cultural map, as you pointed out quite correctly, all these things, but these will be the maps of a pilgrim. Now, your association with Marathi, for instance, is going to be one that is much, much deeper than mine, and your map is going to be much more vibrant and vivid, right? And so therefore, the straightforward question is, then are you equipped well enough to translate? Okay, and my answer to that is no, I'm not. My contention is no one ever is, because even an act of reading is an act of translation, right? When you're reading my book in English and you're reading English, and English is one of the languages with which you're very familiar, you're still translating my words into your thoughts and my thoughts into your words. So everything is about translation, and everything is therefore pitted with the possibility of failure. Now, therefore, the only thing that you can end up doing is by looking at the translation and saying, is this a success or is this a failure? I don't know. I can never judge myself whether those things are successes or failures. But I do believe that there is no such thing as the definitive or the final translation. Constance Garnett, we thought when we were growing up, was the definitive translator of the Russian greats, right? Constance Garnett did Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, all of them, the great Russian writers. And to my consternation, I discovered that this really famous line from Tolstoy is a Constance Garnett line. All happy families are happy in the same way. All sad families, unhappy families are unhappy differently, is not Tolstoy. That's not how Tolstoy starts his book. It's how Constance Garnett thought she should start his book.
Really?
Yes. And so therefore there are new translations being done now of the great works. And to many readers of my generation, though these are more accurate translations, they are not as good. Constance Garnett was a good writer as well. So she did a good job with those books, and these seem stodgy by comparison.
Who determines whether a translated book is good or not good? People who know the original language yet read in the translated language, or the people who only read the translated language?
No, I see. My contention there is that thank God we don't have to decide those things, you and I, Latika. The translation of, say, of Baluta is not aimed at you, because you can read Baluta in the original, and if you can read it in the original, why would you read it in translation? So therefore, the only person, okay, when there is a living author who is bilingual, like for instance, in the case of Sachin Kundalkar, and in the case of Matkari, young Matkari, both of them read my translations and both of them approved them completely. Sachin went so far as to say that this is poetry. You made my novel into a work of poetry. So then you're saying, okay, fine, I'm clear with this.
Actually, very strangely, I met 2-3 people when I was in Turkey who, to my utter surprise, mentioned that they preferred Oran Pamuk in translation. I was quite shocked.
Okay. Well, I
No,
think
I
may have
remember more. It happened to us also. The gentleman told us.
very tormented relationship with with the Turkish upper class, right? And people who can read him in translation, that is in English translation, would be of the upper class, because I think they have a problem with him talking about the Kurds, right? So I don't know what's going on there, but maybe it's true. Maybe for them the English translations work better.
Maybe.
I don't know if I've answered your question, Latika.
I'm glad something is remained open and I can fill that creative gap.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Ekta Kumar who's raised her hand. Ekta,
Yes.
We can't hear
you
you.
need to unmute.
Thank you, Mrs. Code. This is perfect timing because I actually wanted to take on, my question is on translations as well. So I just want to take over from where Ms. Padgaonkar left off. Mr. Pinto, as a writer, I loved what you said about Tolstoy. I didn't know that. And just to flip the translation discussion on the other hand, you as a writer have had your work translated as well, right? Very often as writers, we are so possessive about our own words and how we express ourselves. Like literally every word makes a difference to what it sounds like, right? Stars in the mud versus stars in dirt. There's a world of difference. If you don't know the language yourself, is there no fear that what you're trying to express is just you're giving it to somebody else and there is no way? How would you? So my question, if I have to put it simply, was when your work is translated, how do you trust someone to say, take it and do and make what you, like you mentioned, very often translators just, hopefully you get a good writer, someone with your own sensibilities who's able to take the book forward. But there is also a risk, an inherent risk that you run with every sentence that it will become something else. So
Oh,
as a writer,
I
how
have
do
had
you?
horrible moments in the and really good moments. For instance, when the Marathi translation of M in the Big Boom was underway, it was done by Shanta Gokhale, who was a close friend. So she sat and read me the translation, and I looked at my book and she told me what she'd done and why she'd done it, and it was so wonderful. Because okay, there's one line in M in the Big Boom where he says. And I did look at my father, and his ears did look like bacon curled from too much frying, right? When she translated it, she used a Marathi, not bacon, nothing to do with pork, but she used something that a Marathi thing that is curled up, a Marathi dish that is curled up, and that to me worked. When in the Hindi translation, I was reading the Hindi translation, I found that the writer had said, the translator had said, suar ka mas. His ears looked like suar ka mas. And I think that has to do perhaps with some kind of feeling of discomfort with bacon, some feeling of an unsureness of what bacon actually is, because he probably never ate bacon or saw it, and therefore he was not a very good translator, but still he was a very ill man, so I had to help him with the translation. He did some terrible things to my work, like I had a moment where I say that the unnamed narrator in the book is defeated by the Mahabharata. He's trying to read it and he's defeated by it because it's so vast and so magnificent. And he made that a Betuka book. Okay, and Betuka is completely different, which means it's actually like a terrible insult. And you can imagine where that would have gone with a Roman Catholic writer calling the Mahabharata Betuka in this day and age. So it was that moment awoke me to the dangers of allowing translation to happen in a language that. So I allowed a translation to happen of. I didn't have a choice. When the Sahitya Academy, you get the Sahitya Academy, they translate your book into one language of their choice, an Indian language of their choice. And you don't get to choose which language, and you don't get to choose which translator, which is a terrible pity, because Ambai said she wanted to do it. C.S. Lakshmi said she wanted to do it in Tamil. And I would have loved her to do it because we could have worked together on it. But they gave it to somebody else and he did it. And I had no idea what the book was like. So then you just have to trust. You have to go on trust. That's all. So I'm not trusting anymore.
I
I
was
will not
hoping you'd
only
have an
allow
easier answer.
translations in languages that I can read and I can understand and I can decide whether they've tried their best or not. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you. I was hoping you'd give me an easier answer to say, yes, there is a way. But
I
thank you
don't
for
think
sharing
that
that.
is. And it's not only about being possessive, though I am possessive. It's about like people taking complete liberties, which is not allowable according to me and not fair. I know there is now a whole school of translation that talks about transcreation, but that's not what that's not what I believe in. I believe in translation. I believe, yes, you're going to create a new text, but it must be as faithful as possible to the original, as possible. Fidelity has to be the central motive, according to me.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, otherwise it would not be that book. It would be something else.
Yeah.
Hope it doesn't get into the hands of artificial intelligence.
Chat GPT was going to be my next question. Saying there's no writer's block anymore, you know. There's always something to start with. I mean, I don't know where they're going, but yeah.
Eric, okay, if that's all, then I think we can end here.
Just
Okay.
1 minute.
Yeah.
I was reading something of yours, and it made me feel that I was 19 years old or 20 years old. That whole sentence that you written down. It seemed then like the city could be anything you wanted it to be. Your life could be anything you wanted it to be. And they wandered through the city as afternoon turned to evening, and he wondered if this could be love. As a young teenager, yes, I felt that very much like that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I mean,
you all very much.
yeah, can I just say this? That the book absolutely, shall I say, communicated the angst, of those teenage years. It seemed so real,
Thank you.
it seemed so very real. And Jerry, I'd also like to say that it was such a comfortable read, I mean, other than being able to relate to the characters, finding them interesting, liking them because they were real,
Thank you.
right?
Thank
The
you.
angst that
Yeah.
Yuri goes through, the person that Julio is. I'm
Yeah.
so intrigued by him, very, very intrigued. Then this
Thank
comfortable guy, Muzammil,
Mm.
but then he also has his problems, right, with his family. And this changing from science to arts. I mean, this is such something which is, I mean, I did it, all right?
Yeah.
I changed from science to arts. And I know what it means and how it is perceived and how hard it is to do it, because you're
Yeah.
constantly thinking of the prestige of doing
Yeah.
science and leading to medicine, which is what I
It
was
was
all
from
about.
medicine to arts, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, so I switched. Yeah, so I mean that all rang true. The novel rings so true. So I wanted to tell you that. And the fact that there is no hurry, that's what I mean when I say a very comfortable read.
Thank you.
It's your going along and getting to know these people. And of course, I got to know the city as well, which I hadn't known. So all these new things, and it was very enjoyable.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. So,
So I
Jerry,
would like to
thank you.
thank each one of you for actually, because the only non-renewable resource we have is time, and you spent time, you took time out to be with my book and to read it, and that's really, really important to me as a writer. I'd like to thank all of you for this time that you've taken out to read the book and to be with me here. Thank you all very much.
Jerry, that is such a gracious way of putting it, because we would like to thank you for the time you have given us. This has been very precious, to actually talk to the creator of the book that I have enjoyed. It's been wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye then.
More next weeks quickly.
Yes. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. Wasn't it super talking to Jerry?
Yeah.
Wasn't it wonderful, being able to talk to him straight, as it were? Great. And so let me tell you what we have next Sunday. Just one second.
This is going to be next Sunday or 2 Sundays hence?
Sorry. Yes, it's the 23rd of April, actually.
I think
Next.
stop recording now.
Yeah.
Yeah, Priyanka, you can stop recording.